So folks, last time we looked at what the installation of a wood-burning stove looks like, and today we're going to see what's involved in the long-term running of a wood stove. It's not for everyone, and if you're considering getting one, you need to go into this with your eyes wide open. So today, I'll briefly explain why wood stoves are largely carbon neutral, we'll chat about managing your wood supply, we'll look at moisture content, how to set a fire for a really efficient burn, heat longevity and why you often don't need to have the fire on for that long, some tips for cleaning your stove door, we'll look at some really interesting things I found out when measuring emissions, and we'll look into the long-term running costs. As per usual, I'm not an expert on this subject, I just want to explain our findings with our stove in our scenario. With that in mind, we'll start our journey down in the garden where our fuel supply actually comes from.
So it's a common myth with wood-burning stoves that they pollute the atmosphere and cause more carbon emissions than we had before. But that's not really true. Certainly with modern efficient wood-burning stoves, they're really quite environmentally friendly. And the reason they're carbon neutral is because trees obviously gobble up carbon dioxide through the day and they release oxygen, but trees don't last forever. For example, this tree here is completely dead. And as the tree just gradually kind of becomes part of nature again, branches drop off and they fall to the ground, and eventually those branches rot away, and as they rot, carbon dioxide is released back into the atmosphere, and that happens relatively quickly. It only takes 1 or 2 years for a branch on the ground to completely rot away to nothing. And if you can make use of that wood before it rots away, yes, by burning it, carbon dioxide is obviously going to get released. But all you have to do is plant another tree in its place, and then that sucks up the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide that was released from burning the tree that was going to release the carbon dioxide anyway when it rots away. I hope that kind of makes sense. Obviously there's particulate matters and stuff like that, but again, on an efficient stove, they're pretty minimal, and I'll talk about that later on. I'm going to refer to that as a broken tree, and we've got lots of broken trees in our garden, whether they come down due to windfall, or as I say, you know, trees die. They do have a lifespan, and they do just die of natural causes after a period of time. So I'll explain the whole kind of life cycle from broken tree to stove. And first of all, we do have an area of rotting wood down here. It's very unlikely that we're going to end up burning any of this because, you know, animals do like to live in it, insects live in it, and all of that provides a bit of food for wildlife. So I have no objection to having some wood rotting away. Again, this is all just windfall wood down here. But then we've got this pile here, and this is a mixture of all sorts of different size bits of wood. This was cut down last year, so this has been drying out for pretty much a year now. And this will eventually all get kind of cut to size and put in a log store. I haven't had time to tackle that yet. But we've got this whole pile here and it all needs processed, and there's a lot of wood there. I've got nowhere to put it after processing it at the moment because the log store is already full. We could do with another log store, to be honest, but that's maybe a job for next year. The problem at the minute is that the wood at the bottom of this is probably starting to rot, but the stuff at the top is air drying fine. But anyway, it's from this to log store. As I say, we could do with another one of these, but as you can see, this is completely full. This has been air drying now for about 2 years or thereabouts. And all we do is we take the wood from the to process pile and we just cut it up roughly to the same length, just because it makes it easier to stack. And the length is pretty much a comfortable size for putting in the stove. And for us, that's about 20 centimeters per log. We've got this stacked 3 deep, so it's 3 lots of logs like that deep, so there's a lot of wood in here. We've got wood of all shapes and sizes here, and again, it's going to depend on what wood you've got available. We've got a mixture of birch and apple and elder and plum, and it just depends on the windfall that you've got access to. Hi chicken, what are you doing? And we've obviously got all shapes and sizes here. A lot of this is going to need chopped up with an axe at some point, but again, we've found that just kind of, we've got a lot of smaller pieces here, medium size, really big pieces here that need chopped up, but it's fairly random because when we come out and we start filling up bags to take into the house, you generally want a bit of a mix of big bits and small bits anyway. And then we've also got a store of kindling wood as well. We've got leftover cedar from doing the shed. This splits down, and amazing kindling wood. Old lats from doing the house. We've got loads of kindling there. That just kind of lives in here. And I've also got some logs here ready to go into the log store. These are drying out. These were cut down about 6 months ago or thereabouts. They don't dry out very well in a plastic shed like this because there's not enough airflow. You can see they're starting to go kind of mouldy on the ends. That's because it's in a sealed plastic box. Don't keep your wood in a sealed plastic box. You need basically loads of airflow and a lid over the top to try and keep it vaguely dry. But as soon as we've got some space in the log store, we'll shift all of that out and it can air dry. And all we do about once a week, just pop down and pick up a few logs that are ready to burn.
Personally, I love processing the wood, but it takes a long time and it's not for everyone. Even if you buy the wood ready processed, you're still going to need to move it around and find a nice dry place to store it. And remember, when it comes to storing wood, airflow is really the most important thing. So as long as it's got a roof over it to keep it largely dry, that's generally enough.
Spider living in that one. We'll pop them down by the river. And then we just keep these bags in the garage. You know, we could do with another log store a bit closer to the house, to be honest. I hate chicken following us everywhere. But we generally try and keep about, well, probably 5 or 6 bags in the garage at any one time. And that's kind of the very final stage of the drying process. It just gets any moisture that's on the surface of the wood, because the wood's completely dry internally. But any moisture in the surface then kind of evaporates out while it's doing the final drying in the garage. And then obviously we shift that into the box, into the crate in the house. Obviously in the UK we've got guidelines that you're only allowed to burn seasoned wood. You're not allowed to burn wet wood on fires anymore. I'll include a link to this article down in the description below, but it explains everything in a little bit more detail. But this is put out by, is it DEFRA or the government or HETAS or whoever. The general rule of thumb is that you want the moisture content of the wood to be under 20%. If the wood was cut down like 2 years ago and it's been air drying, then it is going to be below 20%. But if you want, you can invest in a little moisture meter like this. I'll include a link down in the description for something similar to this one. They're not particularly accurate, but just to give you a gauge, there's a piece of wood there, and it is showing, let's see, that was really quite hard to do this while holding a camera, but that's showing about 12 or 13% moisture content. So this wood is absolutely perfect. But as I say, if you want to check moisture content of wood, one of these things can be quite handy. So first thing I do is just clean out from the previous fire. Obviously make sure that it's there's no hot coals or anything. This hasn't been used for a day or so, so I know we're good to go. And all I do is just kind of get all the ashes and just let them fall down into the ash pan at the bottom. Anything that hasn't burned yet can stay in there and it'll burn on the next fire. It's a bit messy, but you need to get used to that if you've got a wood burner. That's all fine, and then just check your ash pan, make sure it's not too full. That needs emptied. I normally find I can get about 3 fires out of 1 empty of the ash pan, so I'll quickly empty that. That's fine, and then don't forget you need to put the vent onto fully open. This fire's actually got 2 vents. It's got a manual vent at the front here, and it's got an automatic vent built in as well, which you hear operating when the fire's running. Then the way I like to set the fire, and there's, you know, more than one way to do this, but the way I like to do it is to do the top. It's kind of the top-down method, but it's a bit of a hybrid kind of top-down method, we're going to call it. So it's kind of good we've got all this leftover charcoal from the previous fire, because it just raises everything off the bottom a little bit. Now put 2 nice big bits right at the bottom there. Then I like to pop a fire lighter in. You don't need very much, a tiny little bit, that'll do. more than enough. And I'm just going to pop that right in the middle there, like that. It's easier to get it in now before we put all the kindling in. And then I'm just going to stack all my kindling up, kind of in a crisscross around that. We're making like a little bridge over the firelighter. You want to make sure the firelighter can actually touch the kindling, but you want to also make sure that you're not blocking your access to it, because obviously you need to light it at some point. Level it out a bit there. You don't need to be that fussy. When I'm not filming it, I can have a fire cleaned out and set in about a minute and a half. It doesn't take very long. And this is where I'm saying I like to do a kind of hybrid method. So we've got the big bits of wood at the bottom, then kindling, and then I like to put some slightly bigger pieces right at the top, but not massive logs right at the top, but just a few bits like that. Otherwise the kindling tends to burn away so quickly. I find that this method works quite well. And then we'll light it. And then shut the door straight away and just leave that to catch. And you should find that that catches really, really quite quickly. At this stage, I'm leaving the vent fully open, but once there's a strong burn going there, I'll turn the vent down to about halfway down. Otherwise, the kindling tends to burn away before the logs have had a chance to catch. So it's only been going for, what, 3 or 4 minutes or something like that. The fire's still cool to the touch. But you can see we've got a really strong burn going there now. So I'm going to turn the vent down to about halfway. So that's fully closed, that's fully open. So it's about there. And it's just to slow the burn down a little bit. You can actually see the black soot at the top of the fire. I don't know if you can make it out, but that's just because the fire's cold. Once the fire gets hot, you should find all of that black charring just kind of disappears, because on an efficient fire, that all gets burnt. There's literally nothing left to burn. You can just about see the reburner at the back there. Can you see the fire coming through the holes at the back of the fire there? That's effectively a secondary burn on the materials, and that's what makes this particular stove so efficient. So I'll just leave that to it now. You can go off, have a cuppa, and we're going to wait for the flames to die right down. But that'll take probably half an hour or something. How are you doing, Nugs? As if by magic, you put the fire on and the cats just magically appear from nowhere. They've got a good sploot going. Anyway, this has been going for about 20 minutes now, and it's I can feel the heat coming off. That's really hot fire going there. And you can see all the carbon deposits have now disappeared off the tiles inside the fire. It's a really clean burn going there. And interestingly, if you go outside and have a look at the chimney, there's nigh on no smoke coming out the chimney at all, because everything is getting burnt. It's a really efficient burn that we've got going there. Ideally, I'd let it die down a little bit more before putting some big bits of wood on, but this will be fine. I'm just going to spread the fire out a little bit. You've got to be careful just when you open it up, because you'll get a big rush of air into it. I'm just going to spread this a little bit. Seriously hot. And then I'm just going to load it up with wood. I've still got the vent on just halfway. Once this catches a little bit more, and once there's a bit more of an aggressive burn going, I'll turn the vent almost all the way to the right to turn the air intake right down. I don't normally cut it all the way off unless I'm wanting the fire to completely die down. But what I normally do is I slide it all the way to the right like that, and then I just slide it about, a centimetre back. But for the minute, you see, if I turn this all the way to the left, the fire will start burning a little bit too aggressively. So at the moment, I'm just going to leave it kind of in the middle. As I say, I'll turn it down once that gets going, and then it's just a question of topping it up as and when. Okay, that escalated quickly. That got going, what, 2 minutes or something? And we've got a really aggressive burn going now. So it's time to close that vent right down. We don't need it to be that aggressive. It'll burn through the wood far too quickly. By the way, all those little kind of clicking noises, that's the automatic air vent trying to close off the air supply a little bit because the fire's getting too hot. And with this particular fire, you'll hear those little clicks all the time. It's just the vents opening and closing. But we've got the manual vent on the front, and it's now time to just shut that down. So that's fully open to the left there, and then that's fully closed to the right, and I'm just going to open it a tiny bit, just that. That'll do. That'll be fine. Lovely burn we've got there, and that's it. Fantastic fire. The heat this little stove gives out is really quite incredible. On this particular one, 4.5 kilowatts in this size space. Apparently we don't need any extra ventilation or anything like that. The only thing we generally do is just open the window a crack, just put it on vent, and that's more than enough. But I'm filming this in November time. Winter's just starting to kick in. You can see it's about 7 degrees outside at the minute. It's currently 23.5 degrees in here. The central heating's set to not come on until it's down to 20 degrees. So as I say, 7 degrees outside, central heating's completely off for the whole house. The other thing with wood burners as well is that it's not just the heat that's coming out from the actual fire, but obviously the whole area around the fire acts like one great big radiator. So the body of the fire itself is about, what, 250, 300 degrees or thereabouts, and that's a great big sheet of kind of steel on the top of it there, so that holds its heat for a long time. And then as we follow out in front of the fire, the hearth is, what, 80 degrees or thereabouts, bearing in mind that a radiator is generally going to run at about 40 or 50 degrees or something. So we've got 80 degrees at the front, and then as we come out into the room, we're down to 60 or 70, and then out into the room down to sort of 30, 40 degrees or thereabouts. So all the way out to about 2 meters in front of the fire there is warmer than your average radiator. And you can see the cats are just loving it. And the thing to bear in mind here is that the fire only has to be on for, what, an hour or so? And this whole area in front of the fire warms up to such a degree that, you know, you can just let the fire die down, and that'll hold its heat for almost an entire day. And by the way, just a little tip as well, if you need to clean the door of the stove, just get a little bit of ash on a damp paper towel, and just give the door a little rub with the paper towel. The ash cleans it really, really well. And if you do that every couple of weeks, then it keeps on top of it, and it's a 30-second job. Another interesting thing as well is that once the fire's got really hot, the glass tends to self-clean anyway. So if you start off with nice clean glass and you don't burn rubbish on the fire that shouldn't be going on the fire, and you're burning nice dry wood, you should find the door keeps relatively clean. So we're on to the following day now, and I just wanted to show you, you know, this is the fire that you've just seen burning, and obviously this is all now cool, and we're down to just literal powder ash that'll just go down into the ashtray at the bottom. But you can see how clean the vermiculite tiles are, and that's generally the way your fire should look. If you're getting like a carbon buildup on the tiles or on the glass, then you're doing something wrong with the burn. It's either wet wood or poor quality wood, or you're not getting sufficient airflow. Maybe you've not got a good enough draw from your chimney. It could be a number of things. One other thing that I just wanted to mention as well, I probably had the fire stacked a little bit too full earlier on. With this particular type of stove, you're not supposed to fill it higher than the level of the secondary burner of this, basically of these little holes at the back. You get the most efficient burn if you keep all of the wood below that level, and kind of little and often for topping it up. And the other thing with this particular stove is that they don't recommend that you load it up with any more than about 2.5 kilos of wood. This single log here weighs about half a kilo, so at any one time you shouldn't really be putting more than about 5 logs in.
I mentioned earlier how modern efficient wood burners are pretty much carbon neutral, but you do still need to consider particulate matter, and this is a subject I could make an entirely separate video about. While I've been editing this video, Keith from Rag and Bone Brown has actually put out an excellent video describing his experiences with his new stove, so give that a watch, link down in the description below. But for now, I'm terrible for going down rabbit holes with this sort of stuff, and it wasn't long before I found myself reading actual EU legislation on the subject. It is actually quite interesting, and I've started to document some of my findings on the Gosforth Handyman website, link down in the description below if that floats your boat. The crux of it is, disregard most of the stuff you've seen in the media since it's all clickbait. To cut a long story short, we all want clean air, but nobody can agree on what clean air actually is. We generally use the PM 2.5 index, in other words, how many particles are there in the air that are under 2.5 microns in size. We measure this in micrograms per cubic meter, so a reading of 50 is 0.00005 grams of particles in 1 cubic meter of air. My little particle detector suggests that anything from 0 to 50 is good. The World Air Quality Project says 0 to 50 is good. What on earth is going on there? And DEFRA, which is the UK's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, says 0 to 50 is good. Well, actually it doesn't. It says 0 to 35 is good and 36 to 53 is moderate, but close enough. So I took some measurements in our house with and without the fire on to see how much particulate matter the stove blew into the air, and from this I could work out how soon we'd prematurely die as a result of keeping warm. I started off by taking some baseline measurements inside and outside with the fire off. This hovered around 4 to 5 inside and about 6 to 8 outside. You'll see from the actual particle count that the vast majority of particles were under 0.3 microns in size, and at this level just walking past the detector can blow dust into the air, and that can skew the measurement. Just remember, anything under 50 is considered good. So in my test, from lighting the stove through to adding the first top-up of wood, there was no measurable difference in the PM 2.5 reading at all. When I opened the door to add more wood, there was still no measurable difference in the PM 2.5 reading, and even after watching the entire of Colin Furz's video about his awesome new workshop, there was still no measurable difference in the PM 2.5 reading. In fact, at one point it dropped to 2, which is the lowest I've ever seen it. There was also no change to the PM 2.5 rating outside while the fire was on. It was still hovering between 6 and 8, and as it happens that perfectly matches the annual average for this area as measured by DEFRA. So I thought, well, that settles that one. The media are talking nonsense and it's time to stop worrying about this. That was until I put the stove on the next night and I was getting readings 3 times higher for some reason. Same wood, same stove, same kindling. So I took some measurements next to the oven, and sure enough we were getting PM 2.5 readings of around 29, and it went up to 31 when I opened the oven door. So then I decided to make some toast, and the reading went right up to 451 at one point, which is considered dangerous. I was so shocked I had to sit down and put a joss stick on, but that sent the PM 2.5 reading past 800. Interestingly, in the room where I lit the joss stick, the particle count was still high the following day, so I guess incense is going to be banned soon.
Let me just reiterate this, because this is quite important and I'm absolutely staggered by these results, to be honest. The fire hasn't been on today at all, and we haven't been cooking, haven't made any steak or anything like that. The only thing that's been on today is that we had one incense stick on about 5 hours ago. And just looking at the particle detector here, so we're looking at this figure here, the PM 2.5 measurement, and it's currently showing as 74 micrograms per cubic meter. Bearing in mind that we're shooting for anything under 50, and normally indoor air pollution in this house is around 5, even when the wood burner is on. So from the simple act of having a joss stick on, we have blown all of the air pollution readings out of the water. So just to clarify, so if I pop this into particle count mode, So at the moment we're looking at the PM 2.5 micrograms per cubic metre, but this is the USA measurement. I'm not even going to go into what that's about. I would pay more attention to this measurement here. But what is quite interesting is when we look at the actual number of particles. So this is physically how many particles it's counting, not a measurement of the weight of the particles, but the actual particle count itself. So we're looking at particle matter that's greater than 0.3 microns, and there's a particle count currently of about 14,000 or thereabouts in the atmosphere. And we've got the media guilt tripping us about heating our homes with a wood burner, when this is what happens when you put an incense stick on. It's absolute insanity. I mean, it's insanity anyway that we're even having to consider heating our homes with a wood burner. That's another whole argument for a different day. It's absolutely inexcusable in a modern society that people are having to resort to this. Everyone on our street is currently salvaging wood and chopping trees down and all sorts just so they can keep warm over the winter. So yeah, don't get us started on that one.
And folks, forget about using a frying pan. I left the particle counter running while I was cooking steak. It started at about 15 when we put the oven on to cook some chips, went up to 133 when I started frying the onions, and eventually topped out at 411 when I fried the steak. Interestingly, even about 4 hours later, after we'd eaten our steaks and watched a movie, we were still getting readings of about 35 in the kitchen. So to summarise, our baseline internal reading was around 5, and that didn't change at all when we lit the fire. The baseline external reading was between 6 and 8, and again throughout the time that we had the wood burner on, that didn't change. Using the oven increased the count to about 30, frying a steak sent it up to 411, making toast gave a reading of 451, and burning incense sent it past 800. So this got me thinking, surely someone's been measuring this for long periods of time outside, and it should be relatively easy to see if wood burners are increasing the PM 2.5 levels, since over winter time you should see the values going off the charts every evening when people put their fires on. And sure enough, I found this website. Check this out. So these are monitoring stations all around the UK, and there used to be one in Gosforth, but it's been decommissioned. But by the looks of it, we've got a monitoring station in Jesmond and one in Newcastle. Let's have a look at the Jesmond one first of all. Weekly graphs, let's try that one. Okay, so this one doesn't measure PM 2.5, so that's not much use. But interestingly, what are all these spikes in nitrogen oxides? Let's see, that is between from 9 to... about 9 to 5. What could possibly be happening on the Cradlewell bypass between about 9 and 5 every day? Anyway, as I say, that's no use. We need a PM 2.5 graph. How about Newcastle? Newcastle weekly graphs. Here we go. We've got a PM 2.5 right at the bottom there. Let's switch all these other ones off. And I would have thought in the middle of winter, every evening this should be going off the scale. But it's not really. It's kind of all hovering between, well, 0 to 15, which is all in the good range, really. And when are we getting spikes? Let's have a look. So we've got a spike here on a Monday between about 12 and 3. Let's switch all this other data on and have a look at what happens then. Oh look, we've got a massive spike in nitrogen oxides around that time. The PM 2.5 spike seems to follow very shortly after the nitrogen oxides spike, and that is vehicle pollution. That's nothing to do with people using stoves. What else can we find on here? Oh my word, you can download CSVs. Oh no. Don't go down the rabbit hole, Andy. Anyway, the nitrogen oxide level seems to be the thing that's spiking every night, and that seems to be causing the PM 2.5 spikes that we saw in the graph earlier, which were still well within safe levels, by the way. So road transport is by far the highest, but the dark blue there, that is 1990, and it's been reducing a huge amount. So 2020, it's come right down. In fact, if we look at this graph here, look at this. So this is nitrogen oxides in the UK from 1970 to 2020, and it used to be all the way up here. So, you know, it's going in the right direction. The thing that worries me just a little bit though is that the World Health Organization seem to be pushing for PM 2.5 emissions to be reduced not to 50 but to 5. How is that even possible when the background outdoor reading in suburbia is between 6 and 8? You could fart next to this detector and it would be higher than 5. So I guess that means for the more sensitive folk, no more barbecues, no more toast, no using the oven, no steak, and definitely don't touch joss sticks. For everyone else, use dry wood, keep it under the 20% moisture content, get used to how your fire works, and if someone tells you wood burning stoves are going to cause the end of the world, point them in the direction of this video. So a big question that I know a lot of you will be wanting to know the answer to is, can you heat your house from a wood burning stove and save a fortune on central heating costs? Can you potentially switch your heating off completely and only use your wood burning stove? And the general answer to that is, I guess it's possible, but you'll not be living very comfortably, because at the end of the day you're going to have one very, very warm room, and yes, the heat from that room certainly spreads out to the rest of the house in a very noticeable way, but any rooms that are kind of a little bit of a distance away from the stove are probably going to be freezing cold. We find that the stove in our house comfortably heats pretty much the entire downstairs, although the front study room, because there's a brick wall between that room and the living room, that tends to be a little bit chilly. And then in terms of upstairs, the bedroom that's directly above the living room, the radiator in that bedroom very rarely comes on because the heat from the living room just rises up naturally into that room, so definitely the stove warms that bedroom up. But again, the bedroom that's above the study room tends to be freezing cold, so you end up having to put the central heating on and try and kind of adjust things and run things so that only selected bedrooms in the house that are far away from the stove actually benefit from it. One reason we'll probably be looking at smart TRVs a little bit later down the line, because it'll be a little bit easier to control heat on a room by room basis. But regardless of that, does it save you money by having the stove on? And the answer to that is absolutely yes, definitely. But that's largely going to be dependent on how much you're spending on wood. For us, we've effectively got a free infinite supply of wood, and therefore we have zero costs. On the other hand, a friend of mine with a wood burning stove spends roughly £15 a week on wood. So as a wild finger in the air guess as to how much you can potentially save by having a wood burner, here's a week where we've had, on one day we had the fire on, and on another day we had the fire off. So on the Monday we had the wood burner on literally all day, from first thing in the morning all the way up until early evening, and then the residual heat in the fire would just let it burn down. But then on the Tuesday we didn't use the wood burner at all. Now, one noticeable thing between these 2 days was that the average outdoor temperature was quite significantly different, and the problem is that we don't know what the average outdoor temperature was until the following day, so it's a little bit of a tricky thing to test. So on the Monday the average outdoor temperature was 3.1 degrees, whereas on the Tuesday it was 7.4 degrees, so quite a significant difference. But even with that temperature difference, on the Monday we only used 55 kilowatt hours of gas, and on the Tuesday we used 81 kilowatt hours. So you could certainly argue that had the days both had the same average outdoor temperature, we would have used even more gas on the Tuesday. The orange bars at the bottom, by the way, is how much gas we're using on hot water, which is normally around kind of 8 to 10 kilowatt hours, depending on how many showers we're having. We don't really use hot water for anything else other than showers. We could have probably reduced the Monday gas usage by getting up a little bit earlier and putting the stove on from, 6 o'clock in the morning. But you'd end up with freezing cold bedrooms. None of the towel rails in the bathrooms would be warm unless you've got electric towel rails. So for us, with our particular family, in our house, in our scenario, which is a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 teenagers, on a day where the average outdoor temperature has been about 3 degrees, we've been in the house all day because we work from home. I think about the bare minimum amount of gas we can get away with using is going to be around the 50 kilowatt hour mark. And based on these 2 days with the fire on and the fire off, we've ended up saving £2.59 by using the stove. But as I say, we've got that quite big temperature differential between the 2 days, and I reckon if we'd used the stove a bit more efficiently and both days had been around the same temperature, we're probably looking at saving about £4 per day. So with that in mind, over about 150 days over the winter period, we're probably saving about £600 per year. But that's assuming all of your wood is free. As I say, a friend of mine that I spoke to doesn't have a free source of wood. He has to buy all of his wood in. He's spending about £15 a week on wood. So over the same period, you're looking at about £330, which is a grand total savings cost of about £270 per year. Obviously, you're going to have some maintenance costs to get your chimney swept and all that sort of thing. So knock off absolute minimum £50 a year, so you might as well say £220 a year. So I guess in that scenario your stove's going to pay for itself in, what, 10 years or thereabouts? So to summarise this, can you get rid of your central heating if you've got a wood burning stove? Probably not. Is it going to save you quite a bit of money if you've got a free source of wood? Yes. Is it going to save you a lot of money if you have to buy the wood in? Not really, but for us there's much more to it than that. It's one of life's little pleasures that still remain that haven't been banned yet, and as a secondary heat source which is largely carbon neutral, it's also a really good way for us to get rid of waste wood materials that would otherwise go to the tip, and ultimately there's nothing that quite compares to the pleasure of coming in from a cold winter's day and sitting down with a cup of coffee in front of the fire and warming up. So folks, hopefully between the installation video from last time and this video, you're a bit better armed to make a decision on whether a wood stove is right for you. Don't forget to check out Keith's video about his experiences. Tim and Joe from the Restoration Couple made a great video about their stove and some tips about DIY cleaning a chimney. In case you're wondering, we got our stove from the wonderfully named Gosforth Fire Station in, well, Gosforth, who are actually located in the old Gosforth Fire Station, which is just fantastic. This isn't sponsored, we paid full price, but I'm happy to give a little bit of a plug to a local business, especially since we're kind of approaching hard times. And if you want more information, tips and stove reviews from an actual professional, check out the wonderful videos from Eco Fires and Stoves, again, link in the description. As I say, I'm documenting all of my findings to dispel some of the misinformation about emissions over on the Gosforth Handyman website at gosforthhandyman.com/stoves, so I'll use that as a bit of a hub to link to all of the source material discussed today. Also, I want this channel to be accurate, honest and unbiased. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to change a video once it's live, and I'm only human, so occasionally misspeak or generally talk nonsense depending on the mood I'm in at the time. So I've added a new and rapidly growing page on the Gosforth Handyman website where I correct myself on various topics. This is linked to from every video that needed a bit of clarification. So for example, I've softened a bit on heat pumps, so I've explained everything in a bit more detail over there. Anyway, go and check it out at gosforthhandyman.com/corrections, and if you've noticed anything I've missed, send me a note via the website and I'll get it updated. As per usual, if you've got anything to add to this, any extra tips for setting a fire, then pop them down in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you're new to the channel, and as per usual folks, be nice to one another, look after each other, and we shall see you next time. Tatty bye! I am literally on fire.